Evelyn left Sunday morning. 2 bags, her work tote over her shoulder, and a quick kiss at the door. A corporate off-site seminar, she said. 3 days somewhere upstate. I didn't ask her exactly. Over the past year there had been 5 or 6 trips like this. She was a managing director at a Manhattan firm, and that kind of schedule came with the territory. I'd stopped asking for details a while back. The routine had become completely predictable. She would pack the leather overnight bag, verify her corporate devices were fully charged, and give me a brief summary of the upcoming agenda before heading down to the garage. Our marriage had settled into a comfortable, quiet rhythm over the years, the kind where you don't cross-examine your spouse about their professional obligations. She had worked incredibly hard to climb the corporate ladder, earning her title through relentless dedication and long hours, so when she mentioned another mandatory leadership summit, I simply wished her a productive week, carried her smaller bag out to the driveway, and watched her high-end sedan clear the gates of our Greenwich home. Tuesday morning I was at my desk going through client files when my phone rang. Manhattan area code, a number I didn't recognize. I operate my own corporate consultancy directly from home, which means I handle sensitive corporate restructuring and strategic planning, so receiving calls from unfamiliar city codes during standard business hours was a regular part of my morning routine. I picked it up, fully expecting a vendor or a prospective client looking to discuss a new contract. Instead, a young woman introduced herself as Evelyn's personal assistant from the city headquarters. Her tone was noticeably tense and slightly hurried. She explained that she had time-sensitive, high-priority closing documents that needed an immediate physical signature before the noon compliance deadline, and Evelyn wasn't picking up her cell. Her phone was going straight to voicemail for several hours, which was completely out of character for an executive who prided herself on constant operational availability. I told her that made sense. I tried to put her mind at ease, explaining that Evelyn was currently at a company off-site and probably had her phone off to avoid interrupting the sessions. I knew how restrictive those high-level executive workshops could be regarding external distractions. There was a sharp, heavy pause on the other end. The background noise of the busy city office seemed to completely vanish for a brief moment. Then, carefully, speaking with absolute deliberation, the assistant cleared her throat. "Mr. Vance, we don't have any seminars scheduled this week. The entire executive board is right here in the building." Evelyn put in for personal days. She requested this time off nearly a month ago and specifically logged her status as completely unavailable for corporate contact. I kept my voice perfectly even. My professional background had trained me to handle high-stress data without showing a single flicker of emotion or letting my tone waver. I told her I'd look into it, thanked her for the update, and hung up. I sat there completely frozen for a long moment, the silence of my empty office suddenly feeling incredibly heavy. Evelyn said it was a corporate event. Her company explicitly said personal days. That wasn't a simple scheduling mix-up or a human resources clerical error. You don't accidentally file for personal time off weeks in advance when your firm is running a mandatory off-site event that requires your presence. Those are 2 completely different requests. The 2 narratives were fundamentally impossible to reconcile, and the cold weight of that reality settled deep in my chest. I picked up my phone and called her. It rang 4 times, the hollow tones echoing through the silent room, and then went straight to the generic automated voicemail greeting. I didn't leave a message. I stood up from my desk, walked calmly into the kitchen, and picked up her personal tablet from the counter. Evelyn kept it on the dock charger right next to the espresso machine. We'd shared a family plan for years. Same primary account, full mutual access, with all device histories fully synced to the cloud since the early days of our relationship. I opened the browser application and checked the history logs. Most of it was ordinary news sites, work email portals, a few luxury shopping pages and real estate blogs, but scattered across the last 6 weeks, the exact same name popped up multiple times. Cedar Lakes Estate. Luxury Retreat Collection. Driving directions from Greenwich. The restaurant evening tasting menu, local weather patterns, and specific cabin availability in late March, then again in April. Cedar Lakes Estate was a high-end, highly secluded resort property located in Port Jervis, New York, just under 2 hours from our front door. I set the tablet down on the counter and waited. I didn't pace around the house and I didn't allow myself to react emotionally. I simply sat at the kitchen table, letting the pieces of the puzzle align in my head, realizing that the foundation of my life had just shifted completely. A couple of hours later, around 2 in the afternoon, I called her again. This time she picked up. Her voice was light, a little rushed, with a forced corporate breathiness to it. She said the event was going exceptionally well, that the morning workshops had been intense, and that it was a very busy day. She claimed it was hard to talk inside the noisy main lecture hall. I listened closely to the background of the call, noticing the distinct absence of any convention chatter or interior echoes. I told her that was fine, keeping my own tone completely casual. Then I asked, almost as an afterthought, where exactly they were holding the summit this year so I knew where she was staying. A brief pause. Upstate somewhere, she said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. I'm not even entirely sure of the exact location or the name of the resort, Richard. They bussed us all in directly from the train station. Look, I really can't talk right now, my team is calling me back to the main seminar room. Everything's fine. Don't worry about anything. I'll text you tonight before bed. The call ended, clicking back into silence. I immediately opened the Find My application on my phone. Evelyn's location was sitting perfectly still on the high-resolution map interface. I zoomed in slowly, watching the icon anchor itself directly over a private cabin cluster. Port Jervis, New York. Cedar Lakes Estate. I stared at that stationary green dot for a long moment. Then I put the phone in my pocket, walked out to the garage and grabbed my keys. I told myself it was straightforward. 2 hours up, 2 hours back. If there was an actual corporate seminar that her personal assistant had somehow omitted from the master calendar, I'd simply walk in, surprise her with a brief visit, and we'd find somewhere nice in the area for dinner. She'd probably tease me about it for weeks, joking about my sudden overprotectiveness, and we'd drive back down together. And if there wasn't a seminar, then I'd know the absolute truth. Either way, I wasn't going to sit in Greenwich playing pathetic guessing games. I got in the car, started the engine, and headed north toward the state line. The drive up to Port Jervis takes just under 2 hours from Greenwich if you stay on the back parkways and avoid the heavy commercial traffic. I had plenty of time to think, the rhythmic hum of the highway providing a steady backdrop to my thoughts. I started replaying the past year in my head, reevaluating our calendar with a completely different perspective. The frequent trips had begun around 14 months ago, right at the start of the previous fiscal year. The first one was back in January, a 2-day conference in Boston, she'd said. Then March, then twice over the summer, then late fall. Each time it followed the exact same pattern. Packed the night before, left early, home by Thursday or Friday afternoon. Always a perfectly reasonable excuse. A client summit, a leadership retreat, a quarterly review offsite. I'd never questioned any of it. She was a managing director. That kind of corporate travel came with the territory, but her assistant had explicitly said personal days for this week, which meant either someone at the office was covering for her or no one knew where she actually was. Either way, at least some of those past trips were complete lies. My mind went back to the tablet history. Cedar Lakes Estate had popped up in her browser multiple times over 6 weeks. That wasn't just idle curiosity or daydreaming. You don't search a luxury resort that often unless you're actively planning a specific getaway or anticipating going back to one. And then the photo hit me. A few weeks ago, I'd picked up her tablet to check the weekend weather and a memories album popped up on the main screen. The photo app pulling together random pictures from exactly a year ago. I'd scrolled past it without a second thought at the time, completely trusting. But one image had registered in my mind, even if I didn't realize its significance until now. Evelyn at what looked like an outdoor corporate event, standing exceptionally close to a man I didn't recognize. His arm was around her shoulders. Both of them were laughing. I hadn't thought anything of it then, assuming he was just another high-net-worth client. Now, it was the only thing I could think about. I kept driving north, watching the scenery shift into the rolling hills of the valley. Cedar Lakes Estate sits on a beautiful hillside overlooking the valley below. Stone buildings, wooden walkways, and manicured gardens sloping down toward the water. I pulled into the visitor parking area just after 5 and sat in the car for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the surroundings. The main restaurant had an outdoor terrace open to the panoramic view. I got out of the car, closed the door quietly, and walked toward it slowly, keeping my distance near the tree line to avoid being seen out in the open. I spotted her before I'd even taken 20 steps. Evelyn was at a secluded table on the far end of the terrace, a glass of white wine in front of her catching the late afternoon sun. Next to her sat a man I'd never seen before, tall, somewhere in his 50s, wearing a dark jacket. As I watched from the shadows, he said something to her and put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her in. She laughed and leaned into him slightly. Both of them looking out at the valley below like a long-term couple. I pulled out my phone, adjusted the camera zoom, and took several clear high-resolution photos. Then I turned around and walked back to the car. I sat in the driver's seat and opened the tablet I'd brought along from the kitchen counter. I pulled up the memories album and found the old photo from the previous year. Evelyn at that corporate event, The exact same silver-haired man standing close beside her, his arm around her. I held my phone next to the tablet, comparing the two images. Same guy. Same posture. Same smile. I tossed both devices onto the passenger seat. I opened the browser and searched for licensed private investigators in the Orange County area. I found one with solid reviews, called the number, and laid it out in plain, clinical terms. 2 people, this specific location, and I needed time-stamped photos, as many as he could get over the next few days. He said he'd start that evening. I started the engine and drove back to Greenwich. 2 days later, an email came in from the investigator's secure server. 20 photographs, time-stamped and location tagged. Evelyn and the man checking in at the front desk. The 2 of them at dinner, heads close together over a candlelit table. Walking the grounds in the morning, holding hands. Leaving together in his car. The investigator had also included a separate note with a name, Arthur Pendleton, 52 years old, partner at a major Manhattan law firm. I pulled up the firm's website and found his bio in the directory. Corporate litigation, 20 years with the company, extensive client roster. His photo matched the man on the terrace perfectly. Then I kept reading through the public records. Pendleton's wife was the daughter of the firm's founding senior partner. Her father had built that legal empire over 30 years and still ran it with absolute control. In the Manhattan legal world, that marriage wasn't just personal, it was structural. Pendleton's entire position at the firm, his client relationships, and his standing in that elite circle all depended entirely on that connection. Without it, he was just another litigator looking for a new home. I leaned back and thought about that power dynamic for a while. Then I opened my laptop and searched for upcoming events connected to the firm. The senior partner was hosting an annual client conference the following week at a hotel in Midtown. The event was open to corporate clients and prospective partners with online registration available. I pulled up my consulting firm's credentials, filled out the form, and paid the fee. I now had a reason to be in that room that no one would question. All that was left was deciding exactly what to put in the envelope. The next morning I printed all 20 photographs. Clean prints, full size, with the timestamps clearly visible on each one. I stacked them in order, slid them into a plain manila envelope and sealed it. That was the extent of my preparation. There wasn't much else to do. I've been thinking about this for days, looking at it from every angle. Evelyn's employment contract prohibited personal relationships with partners at counterparty firms. I remembered seeing that clause when she signed it 4 years ago. That was one side of the equation, but Pendleton was the more vulnerable pressure point. His father-in-law was hosting the conference, and Pendleton's entire position at that law firm depended on his marriage staying intact, one envelope in the right hands. And the foundation of his entire career would crumble. I wasn't going to make any calls. I wasn't going to send an email. I was going to walk into that room, find the right person, and deliver it in person. Simple and clean. The conference was on Thursday. I put on a suit, grabbed the envelope from my desk, and drove into the city. Midtown was in its usual mid-morning rush. Taxis, construction, and people moving fast with their heads down. I parked 2 blocks from the hotel and walked over. At the registration desk, they found my name on the list, handed me a badge, and pointed me toward the main ballroom on the 3rd floor. I took the elevator up, badge in hand, envelope tucked under my arm. I knew exactly what I was walking into, and I knew what would happen next. I went in anyway. The conference room was set up with round tables hosting maybe 150 people. Coffee stations lined the wall, filled with low conversation, the kind of room where everyone already knows everyone else. I grabbed a coffee and found a seat toward the side where I could see the stage clearly. Lawrence Sterling stepped up to the podium at 9 sharp. I'd looked him up earlier that week. 70, silver-haired, the kind of man who'd spent decades being the most important person in every room he entered. He welcomed the guests, talked about the firm's track record, and outlined what the next year looked like for their practice areas. His voice was measured, well-suited for large audiences. When he stepped down from the podium, a small crowd moved toward him immediately. I waited. I finished my coffee and watched the room. After about 15 minutes, the crowd thinned out. A colleague spoke to him briefly, then walked away. Sterling stood alone for a moment, scanning the room the way a host does when he thinks the hard part is over. I walked over. Mr. Sterling, Richard Vance, Vance Consulting, based in Greenwich. He shook my hand and gave me a polished smile. I set the envelope down on the table next to his coffee cup. There's something inside you'll want to see. He picked it up, pulled out the top few photographs, and went completely still. He stared at the first photo for a long moment. Then he squared the stack, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it away. He didn't say a word. I thought you should know before this becomes someone else's problem, I said. I turned and walked out. I was back in Greenwich before lunch. I got home around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Evelyn's car was in the driveway and the living room light was on. She was sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand when I walked in. She looked up at me and I could tell instantly that something had gone wrong. Her face was tight, controlled, but she looked like she was about to crack. She said Arthur had blocked her on everything that morning, every number, every platform all at once. Then her firm's general counsel received a letter from his attorney. In it, Pendleton described her as someone who had been pressuring him inappropriately, his way of getting ahead of the story and painting himself as the victim. She looked at me directly. Richard, what did you do? I saw no reason to beat around the bush. I calmly told her that her trips to Cedar Lakes were no longer a secret, that I'd driven up there myself and seen everything I needed to see. That earlier that week, I'd been in Manhattan and had a brief conversation with Lawrence Sterling. Evelyn went completely still. I told her that Pendleton had done exactly what anyone in his position would do. He chose his marriage, his firm, and his father-in-law. She sat back down slowly. She stared at a fixed point across the room and didn't say a word for a long time. I had nothing left to say. I walked into the other room and left her alone with it. 2 days later, I was in the kitchen with Evelyn when her phone rang. She answered and went completely silent. From where I was standing, I could clearly hear the dry, sharp voice of a company representative on the other end. The caller spoke quickly and bluntly, rattling off the facts. That morning, Evelyn's access to all corporate systems had been completely revoked. She was ordered to return her work laptop and surrender her building pass by the end of the day. The firm was firing her for cause, citing a direct and gross violation of her employment contract. No severance package, no letters of recommendation. The brief conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Evelyn listened to the verdict in silence and hung up. A heavy silence filled the kitchen. For a moment, neither of us moved. Evelyn stood there for a long time, looking down at the phone in her hand. Finally, her gaze snapped to me. There were no tears, no regret, just pure cold hatred. I said nothing. There was nothing left to explain to her. Evelyn turned on her heel, walked quickly out of the kitchen and disappeared upstairs. Her phone was left lying on the counter. 2 days later, I walked into the kitchen in the morning. Evelyn was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. I set a folder down in front of her. Divorce papers, standard terms on division of property. She opened the folder and glanced at the first page. Then she looked up at me. I told her the marriage was over. That dragging it out made no sense for either of us. The house was mine before we married and it was staying mine. Her car and her accounts were hers. She read through it in silence. I stood by the window and didn't rush her. She didn't argue. She picked up a pen and signed every single page where marked. I took the folder, closed it, and drove straight to my attorney. The paperwork was finalized within the week. Evelyn moved out by the following Friday. Where she went, I didn't care to ask. A month later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned she'd taken a position at a smaller firm in New Jersey. I didn't hear anything about Arthur Pendleton after that, but a few months later, I came across a brief note in a legal industry newsletter. He had stepped down from the firm, citing personal reasons. No further details. Monday morning, I went back to running my company. The clients were still there, the work was still there, and life moved forward the way it always does when you stop waiting for things to make sense and just get on with it. What do you think of this story? What would you do if you heard that from her assistant? Would you wait for her to get back from her work trip, or would you head straight to the resort like the main character did? Share in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are so many more incredible stories on the way.